Let's continue with Simone, because we're still looking at the legal ways of stopping this and how to counteract. And then we're going to come to the young ladies who are doing the film aspect of it, and how we can show through film what we can do. Both Felicia and Jessica being filmmakers and actors. Now we're going with the activists and then the actors.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be beside all of these wonderful women here today and all of the leaders in the movement who are in the audience. When I heard about a woman named Ruchira Gupta, who, by the way, is described, I think, most aptly in Nicholas Kristof's book, Half the Sky. What is the name of the book? Half the Sky. As more intimidating than any brothel owner. It was in 2006. I had just come to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime a year before, and I was naive, and I thought, oh, well, why isn't this issue in the Security Council? This is also a threat to peace and security, and women are being raped and sold in areas of conflict, where there's even more vulnerability to commoditizing women's bodies and exploiting them. And I was told, well, that's not what the Security Council does. And so I was talking to some of the women leaders. I think it was Taina and maybe Jessica Neworth at the time and some others. And I asked them, who's the best person I could bring to a informal Security Council meeting called ARIA Formula to talk about this issue? Who would know how to handle these diplomats? You have to kind of bring them along a little bit differently than others, but who would be passionate and could speak so eloquently about this? And everybody who I asked said, oh, you have to bring Ruchira Gupta there. And so that was in 2006. And I just want to tell all of you that it takes a lot of time to build something in the UN, but it can happen. Because 9 years later, in December of 2015, under the presidency of the US, when it was in the Security Council under Ambassador Samantha Power, we had for the first time an actual Security Council presidential statement on trafficking in persons, and a survivor for the first time testified in the Security Council. Later on, that survivor, Nadia Murad, would become a UN Office on Drugs and Crime Goodwill Ambassador for the dignity of survivors of human trafficking, the first time the United Nations appointed a survivor leader as a Goodwill Ambassador rather than celebrities, whose role is also important. But I think it speaks a lot about Ruchira's passion and her working with the UN and trying to push us to do a better job. And because of that, we not only have that first Security Council meeting that took place in December of 2015, but we have Security Council Resolution 2331 that took place a year later, really bringing this issue of human trafficking, sex trafficking, the selling of women to the forefront in the Security Council. And now it comes up every year in the Security Council. In December of this year, it will be the third time this issue comes up in the Security Council. And you need to talk to the countries in the Council, the 5 permanent members and the others who rotate, about what it is they would like to see in December when they review the resolution again, to make sure that we move forward on doing something concrete about human trafficking. The figures about human trafficking are quite disturbing. In the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, we issue every 2 years a biannual global report on human trafficking that the General Assembly requires us to issue. The next one will come out in the fall, and the figures are that in 40% of countries they reported 10 or less convictions for human trafficking, and in 15% of the countries, 0 convictions, right? We know this is something that goes on in every single country, and so that's clearly unacceptable. On the other hand, we do have, as some of the speakers have already mentioned, a very comprehensive definition of what human trafficking is. And we want to make sure that that definition that's in the UN Protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. It's really important to bring out especially women and children, because it is women and girls who are the majority of the
and usually it's the most vulnerable part
absolute,
of the population.
Absolutely. And there are many forms of human trafficking, be it forced labor, trafficking for the purpose of organ removal, but sex trafficking is the most prevalent form of human trafficking. And that's not to say we shouldn't work on other forms, but we must remember and prioritize our work in accordance with what the prevalence of the crime. We have some other good things that have happened based on the advocacy here. We have 3 sustainable development goals that deal with human trafficking. Goal 5.2 on trafficking in women and girls, Goal 8.7 on forced labor, and Goal 16.2 that deals with all forms of human trafficking. We have a UN Global Plan of Action to combat human trafficking and a trust fund, especially for women and children that Ruchira mentioned. And what we really need is for all of you to put a lot of pressure on the UN to make sure that we do even more. The more pressure you put on me, the farther I can go with all of you. Thank you.
That's very important. I'm so I'm going to ask Jessica to comment on this. Her angle is not so much human trafficking, but it also is about vulnerable women and who are being taken advantage of. So maybe you can elaborate on that. And then we'll go to Felicia, who is developing a feature film about the subject, and then she'll tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, just talking about what it's like as a filmmaker tackling this kind of subject matter, because honestly, I mean, these women are exactly who we try to make these films for, to get it into your hands. You know, when I first went to Liberia, it was the first feature documentary that I was working on, and to be honest, I had no intention of tackling this subject matter. I was there for a completely different reason. And the little girl, Olivia, in the film, walked into our life, and we already had the camera gear there. We were working on something else, and it was her mother who sat down with us and started telling the story, and you know, we just realized at that point that this was the story that we needed to follow. Did it for about 10 weeks, went back several times, and at the time, my co-producer and I, you know, we were so full of anger and rage and wanted to do something so desperately that we felt like, you know, we were going to go back there. We were going to go back there and we were going to tackle this on the ground. We were going to go to the orphanages where these young girls were that had been raped and exploited, and, you know, but the reality of that was that we didn't have the kind of experience to do that. What we needed to do was make a film, tell the story, make it as a tool that we could then give to organizations that, you know, are on the ground, that are working on this issue. So I'm really honored to be here with these guys. And, you know, telling this story about a girl in Liberia, a lot of people would say, well, it's Liberia. I mean, why are you, you're going to show this in the US? Like, nobody even knows where Liberia is. That's what they said to us a lot. And we did a university tour, we showed it all over, and the fact is that it's happening here just as much. And it opened up a conversation where people would approach us afterwards and say, look, you know, this happened to me, and I want to talk about it, and I want to get this film out there. In some ways, we felt like it was even easier for people to approach because they felt a little bit maybe disconnected because it did seem like it was happening somewhere else.